Welcome to the Monday Call. I'm James Gregor, and I'm thrilled to welcome this week's guest, Craig Fenton. Craig is the founder of Fenton Innovation, an agency specialising in AI-driven automation solutions for enterprises. Quite the mouthful. Previously, he was CEO of New Zealand Rugby Commercial. He spent 7 years at Google overseeing strategy and operations for the UK and Ireland business, and served as a partner at Accenture for 16 years, where he managed sales across the communications, media, and technology sectors. Beyond his professional achievements, Craig is an author, angel investor, and advisor to numerous startups. He also founded a record label to support creatives from underprivileged backgrounds in music and film. Craig, one of your things that you have talked about is your what is your why? And I'm going to read it out. And what's really interesting about this is you're from the bottom of the world, and yet this is your outlook on technology, and your why, or your mission statement, I guess, is you're passionate about building things or changing things, ideally both, and you'd like to do this using the power of technology. Well, what an awesome way to introduce an impressive CV, an impressive person, and thanks for. I think you're here in Auckland for about 24 hours, and I managed to grab you before you go back north to the Northern Hemisphere. But welcome along to NZ Fund's Monday Call.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me, James.
So I have got reams of notes of different things I want to ask you, but it perhaps as often these podcasts are, a lot of it comes from, your childhood and growing up and some of your mentors and things. So maybe you can start off with who's Craig Fenton? What did you want to be when you grew up, sort of thing, and how did we get to now?
Wow, that's going back a long way. I'm not sure I'm not sure I know what I want to be now. So I certainly didn't back then. But yeah, Aucklander, grew up in Auckland, and had a fairly typical Kiwi childhood, I would say. Probably one of the earliest sort of formative moments was tinkering around with my grandfather in his shed, building stuff, trolleys and electronic circuits, and kind of got the bug a little bit there, certainly from a technology perspective. My dad had a toy company which sort of evolved into electronic toys, and that evolved into becoming a distributor of Amstrad computers. Some of your listeners may remember those.
Freddie Frank games and Boulder Dash and things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we always were very fortunate to have early versions of technology, Texas Instrument computers, Amstrad computers, and things like that. And I always found that kind of fun rather than work. And that's probably the earliest moment that sort of gave me the bug. And I've been a sort of lifelong fanboy of tech. I'm a bit of a gadget geek. I love to try things and generally just follow my curiosity and just find technology interesting.
So if we fast forward to right now, Fenton Innovations is essentially an AI company. But then if we rewind to the start of your, I guess, professional career, I think you were a lawyer in New Zealand before you went overseas, but then you got into technology at Accenture, and AI, I think, was it even a concept that existed? I'm not sure, but how have you seen your careers, I guess, evolved with that? But when you think about technology, and what are some of the things that you really think are the big key moments in technology to get to where we are now, and what are the things that you've witnessed as big changes? Obviously, things like the internet and stuff, but that's maybe a bit earlier on. But
yeah, great question. And you sort of breezed through that legal phase. I took a turn there. I had 6 years actually.
6 years, sorry. It was bloody hard work.
No, it was cool. It was really cool. But I sort of realized early on that I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a career lawyer. I was very interested in business, and actually towards the tail end of that, had some experience working around the nascent issues of IP in an internet age. This is the late 90s at the time, and everyone was sort of trying to get to grips with what publishing looked like online. And
Fascinating.
the other thing that was going on was the millennium bug. Everyone was anticipating the end of the world would sort of all drop off a
Buying your cans of baked beans and things.
precipice, and and that was the thing. So that certainly got my attention. Ended up setting out with my backpack, headed off to London, do an MBA, and make that sort of transition into business. To your question, I think there's, for me, 4 tectonic shifts in technology, certainly in my lifetime. The first was the internet, and that was a pretty important moment, wasn't it? The second was the smartphone. 2007, Steve Jobs walks onto the stage with his turtleneck jumper.
Yep.
And, that was a moment, not so much because of the change in device, but because of the shift from the device to what sat behind it. It became a window, didn't it, into the world that sat in the palm of our hands. Do you remember the phone company that had the dominance in that?
The Nokia.
Nokia, right?
Yeah. Where are they now?
Market share than all of the other handset providers put together, and the one that they were concerned about at the time was BlackBerry.
Another dinosaur now, because does it exist even more, BlackBerry?
I think there's probably some collector's items out there.
I remember my first job at NZ Funds, and I remember when I was given a BlackBerry after you had to be here for 4 years and a certain seniority, and wow, what a day that was! And you could get email on your BlackBerry.
It was wicked,
right? It was,
and they did the unthinkable, which is they cornered the market for both business people like you and me, as well as the youth, because it was essentially like a free text system. And that really
Bloomberg Messenger. Exactly. That's right. I forgot about Messenger. BlackBerry Messenger. I mean, not Bloomberg, BlackBerry Messenger. There was that.
And what Nokia missed at the time, they were sort of focused on BlackBerry, was that everything had changed. It wasn't simply about a device that was different. That device opened up a new ecosystem behind it, and they realized that too late, and now they don't exist apart from a few IP patents. So that was the second. The third was, for me, blockchain, and I think that's still sort of rather nascent, but just a new sort of decentralized way of enabling things like fractional investment, which may be a subject of interest in your field. A wonderful technology that will continue to develop. And now this, and this, by this I mean AI and the sort of generative AI sense. The computer science of artificial intelligence has been around for a good 30 plus years. 1996, I think it was, Big Blue, IBM's version of AI, took on Gary Kasparov, the chess player, and here we are today in an entirely new paradigm of a technology or a computer type of computer science that's decades old.
This is perhaps a really unfair question, because it's hard to sort of describe in a couple of sentences, but if someone said to you, what is AI, in the sense of the AI we're talking about now, what is it and how should we think about it? Because I think as investors on listed markets, sometimes we think of AI as the people that make the chips and the data centers, because that's what you were investing in, because that's what's listed on the stock market. But actually AI is far bigger than that. And how do you define it? What do you think about it when someone goes, what is AI?
I think fundamentally AI is a sort of fancy word to describe a computer program that recognizes patterns in useful ways and applies that in valuable sort of applications. And that's essentially, what we call generative AI, the product of these so-called large language models, is a type of that. It's predicting, what logically comes next in the sentence, and doing that in a massively intuitive, at the point of consumption way, trained on big data sets. And the thing that's interesting about that, and different from the Gary Kasparov days, is that whereas early artificial intelligence was essentially big programmed decision trees, these days the type of generative AI is able to operate in a way that's rather like the way that we do, rather intuitively. It's able to leave the rails, so to speak. It doesn't have to follow those tributaries that smart computer programmers and chess players have programmed in. And the models themselves are able to learn in the way that we do. And that was proven in probably the most interesting way during the sort of 2019 phase, where AlphaGo, the product, the AI product of my old colleagues at DeepMind in London, took on another board game, the world master Lee Sedol of the game of Go, Chinese board game, and beat him. But the interesting sort of difference between the Garry Kasparov phase and the AlphaGo phase is that whereas chess is complex, it can be programmed. It's like a big decision tree. A game of Go, because the board is 25 by 25 squares, there are more possible moves in the game of Go than there are atoms in the universe. It's what mathematicians call a combinatorial explosion. And the reason that's significant is that it can't be programmed. It has to be learned in the same way that you and I learn.
So it almost has to use its intuition, understanding.
Yeah, and that sort of that got highlighted in a spectacular way, at least spectacular for geeks like me, because I think it was move 78 in the game against Lee Sedol, AlphaGo, the AI, played a move that was entirely unorthodox and very counterintuitive. So humans learn in a sort of experiential way, but they're also influenced by orthodoxy.
And being rational and all those things.
And being rational. Whereas if you set an AI off to learn and play it, it'll essentially play itself millions of times. It's not influenced by orthodoxy. It's essentially learning from first principles. So, it comes up with new insights and new ways of looking at the world.
That's incredibly exciting. But do you also find it scary?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any technology that's powerful in the wrong hands can be used for nefarious purposes. I don't think even the smartest of computer science scientists understand all of the dimensions and sort of what's happening in the box. And I think they're very conscious of that, certainly the ones that I've spoken to. So it's important to develop with intention and probably moral guardrails, as well as, the enthusiasm of an overexcited engineer.
So why don't we dig a bit deeper into Fenton Innovations? Because I think that will give us perhaps a better understanding of I think the difficulty is, we all know, we were talking about this before we started recording, where there's this perception that people know AI is important in their life somehow, but don't quite know where to start with it. And perhaps thinking about some of your real life examples in terms of the businesses that, well, not only Fenton Innovations, but some of the startups that you're working at, and what do they actually do to harness the technology, and what are they trying to solve?
Yeah, it's the most common thing we hear dealing with customers. Actually, we know it's important, but we don't know where to start. So if that's how you're thinking, you're not alone.
I always joke that I'm pretty sure I'd nail cheating in my assignments at university. I can do that part, but there must be some other use cases, and I'm not at university anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely other use cases. And the best answer to that question, where you start, is somewhere and now. And just play with it. There's a couple of things that I'm going to say that are probably counterintuitive or a little bit, against the grain. The first is AI in and of itself has absolutely zero value outside its application. So it's the application that matters. The technology is only as impressive as the way it's used. So rather than thinking about the technology, it's like I've got a hammer, I must go find a nail to hit with it. Start with the business. Like, what are the opportunities and challenges? What's holding us back? Where are the choke points in the business? And then think about, okay, well, is there a tool here that could be useful in solving that, unlocking the scale that we could reach, or reinventing, reimagining a customer experience that's perhaps AI driven and sort of less stuck in the rails of a 1.0 website? What if instead of the person navigating the website navigates the person, for example? Now, that is possible with AI. And the other thing I would say that's sort of probably a little bit counterintuitive, we think that the AI age is more than ever a human age. The applications we see and we develop and implement, more often than not, in fact, most of the time, empower and lift humans, give them superpowers. Because all of us have those jobs where there's kind of what I call a crap creep, right? You're paid because of your experience and your ability to make good judgments and decisions and build interpersonal relationships. But often our jobs involve quite a lot of time preparing to do that rather than actually doing it. And a lot of that sort of preparing to do it can be automated through AI. So we build AI applications for enterprises, and they typically fall into one of two buckets. Either you're sort of reinventing or reimagining a customer experience and using the power of AI to navigate the human rather than expect the human to navigate your digital presence, or you're using it to deploy and clean up that sort of that torso and tail of crap work that creeps into every organization and individual's job, and that's typically a sort of an automation. 4 use cases we see frequently. Most of the things that we do fall into one of these 4. The first is manual clunky stuff. So an example there, it's a application that we've just developed, is invoice reconciliation. It's a boring back office function. We did some work with a tourism company in New Zealand that had a team of 4 people doing almost nothing other than taking in the 5,000 invoices they received every month and mapping them to traveller and their travellers or their itineraries. Right, not the most exciting work if you're a chartered accountant and finance professional. Pretty boring, and therefore very prone to error, and also something that can be automated. So the system that we developed does 1,000 invoices a minute, and just throws up to the finance professionals the really knotty anomalies, so that they're making judgments, not just doing clerical work. The second use case is around sort of complex systems. So you change one thing, everything else changes. You see this a lot in logistics systems, where you've got essentially a multivariable equation. Us humans find multivariable equations quite hard to solve, at least mentally. Computers are pretty good at it. The third use case that we see a lot of is high search costs. So we're doing some work, for example, in the super yacht provisioning area. Super yachts go for a grocery shop. They generally spend, $200,000 on their grocery shop. It's not just the veg and the meat and the wine. There's a very long tail of rather exotic, never seen before items like decorative cushions, scented candles. The most unusual one we've heard is armored vehicles. Somebody's got to go figure out how to source that stuff, right? You get on the keyboard and you start Googling. High search costs. AI is pretty good at that because it's got search tools and it can take a search in an instant. We built a little profiler tool that we were playing with before. If you're going to meet somebody, typically what you or I would do in the past, at least, is go onto LinkedIn, maybe do a bit of a Google search on them and start sort of to build a profile. Well, an AI can do that in an instant and package it in a way that's snackable and consumable.
And like you said, they don't have to be on social media in order to get that.
Yeah, all of us sort of have this sort of this trail of this digital graph, if you like. And the final use case that we see a lot of is big data. I put it like that. So computers are just very good at taking structured and unstructured data, finding patterns that are interesting and surfacing actionable insights.
So when you think about it, then, from your business point of view, when you're thinking about your business and your growth of that, are you going to certain sectors and going, "Hey, we could do something in this aspect," uh, or are you finding industry and more coming to you and go, "Hey, we need to solve for this, and we think you might be able to help"? Like, what's the push pull in that yet? Because in the end, I'm thinking it's going to be a lot more of inbound. But at the moment, because it's early doors for a lot of us, sort of who are not dealing with it day to day, are going, I didn't even know you could help me with the sourcing of stuff for super yachts. But that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it, because I'm at the moment paying 4 guys probably from New Zealand who are on an OE in Greece to go and try and source armored vehicles and exotic cushions. That costs a lot and takes a lot of time, and it might not be successful.
Yeah. Look, we're a new business, so I wouldn't sort of present as an expert in any way. We're kind of finding our way, and finding the market on this. So it's a little bit of both. What we've chosen to do is focus on 3 industry verticals. The first is marine, the second is travel and tourism, and the third is private capital. So they sort of think the investment funnel, and then you're dealing with a portfolio of companies, typically with a private equity or a VC, and that over time becomes a movement where you sort of accelerate your value release or your value creation plan by pulling, levers, AI levers, in smart ways within those companies, generally across one of those four use cases. We'd like to build a business that has annually recurring revenue, so it's a license model. We're trying to build a set of configurable modules, AI modules, that do a thing that's important with that industry that we've heard multiple times. So it's a good indication that's an important thing to solve. And we're talking to those industries, but we're also being approached to do discovery sessions on wildly different things. I had a conversation today with the Guide Dogs Association of Australia. That's more of a sort of social interest thing, and I'm keen to help out with. But you get interest and demand from across the board, and it typically just starts with a conversation like we're having now.
Yeah, there's so many use cases if you really think about it. But like you said, you don't know where to start. But it's like, somewhere, and here's good, and now's good.
Yeah.
If we take a step back a second and go, and again, this is probably coming from the context of being in listed markets and thinking about big tech and things, but your experiences at Google may or may not be relevant in this, but there seems to be a huge amount of capital being spent at the sort of the development end, and it's quite competitive. These tech companies have a lot of cash, so it's not like the tech boom back in the noughties when these companies had no money and were raising money hand over fist and then losing it all. These guys have big cash balances anyway, so it's kind of being self-funded. But are there going to be winners and losers? And does anybody, not just you, does anybody have any insights who those winners and losers are going to be? Or is this such a massive change that, like I'm going to use a bad example, but like the mobile phone market, Apple's dominant, but Samsung's are pretty good, and so are lots of other brands, despite some falling by the wayside, like BlackBerry and Nokia. Or is everybody racing to be the one, and everybody will sort of fall into line?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be quite as monolithic as that.
You just described it in one word, what I just took like 5 minutes to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you think back to 2000, right, the age 98 to 2002, let's say, which is the dawn of the internet, everyone was trying to sort of figure it out. It was a bit of a gold rush. And if you think about the technology of the internet, it was a decentralized network. It was designed by a combination of university systems and military. So if you took out one node, that was okay because the packet would reach its destination via a different route. What we didn't expect is that would become co-opted so to speak, by a few very large players. Google was and still is one, Meta, another, Amazon sort of emerged, and AWS, Microsoft, Apple, through the sort of mobile phone route, and a few of them. So it was, it did become that sort of monolithic, standardized model, and there were definitely winners and losers. I don't think pets.com exists anymore.
Well, that's the interesting thing is,
Webvan was another one.
but yet Amazon and all that in the initial period, it didn't even exist. Facebook didn't exist until much later.
No, and actually for the first years, the first 4 years of Google's existence, it wasn't even a business. Like, it didn't earn money. It was a university
bunch
project.
Of university students.
98, Sergey Brin and Larry Page were students at Stanford University in a borrowed garage owned by a friend of theirs in Mountain View, with a stack of servers, and they downloaded the internet. Right, that was possible back then because there was not so many pages, and they were thinking about and experimenting with a different way of ranking those pages for relevance. And it turns out they came up with an insightful way of doing that. It was a little bit different than the other players at the time, and it was so much better. It became quite dominant in that sense. Now, I think there's a couple of things that feel different to me. The first is it's changing way faster than it ever did for the internet. I think the path to 1 billion users for ChatGPT was a fraction of the time of the equivalent path to 1 billion users of the internet or applications within that. The other thing that's changed, the so-called Moore's law, which is more of a sort of technology premise that the processing power would double and the cost would halve. And that's been true for 40 or so years. You get chipsets from makers like NVIDIA, etc. These are hugely powerful, and they're starting to reach the boundary lines of quantum physics in terms of miniaturization and heat control. But the Moore's law within AI is even more impressive, that the effectiveness by some measures is doubling every quarter.
What, every quarter?
Every quarter. So if somebody comes and presents themselves as an AI expert, I certainly wouldn't characterize myself like that. They either don't understand the field or they're just lying, right? It's changing so rapidly, it's overwhelming. And what that means is a Cambrian explosion of tools and applications. Now, that's really overwhelming. It's certainly exciting. I find it exciting, but it's also overwhelming. And I think we're starting to see some trends emerge. It would be foolish of me to try and predict with certainty the end game here. Don't think there will be an end game, by the way. It'll be an evolution. But a few things strike me as emerging truths. The first is large language models, the so-called generative AI applications, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, Mistral, DeepSeek, Llama. They're sort of foundation stones, right? It turns out they're quite useful, right? If you harness them and they're getting better, much better. They're also commoditizing, in my opinion, right? There's this sort of horse race. GPT-5, at the time of recording, has just come out. It's really cool, right? It's much better than the last version, and everyone's sort of raving about GPT-5. I guarantee you somebody else will.
Grok will come out and it'll be even better.
Grok is amazing.
And it's annoying. It's sort of like all the down streaming where you end up having to buy all of them, and all it does is cost a lot.
Well, yes, and like there's a little bit of it. First of all, they're getting better and better and better. So, is there an earth-shattering difference between these models? For the most part, no. Really. Right? Maybe if you're doing hardcore coding, Claude is probably on top at the moment. Let's see if it stays that way. But they're also getting cheaper. The training of them on these data sets is getting cheaper. Perhaps motivated somewhat by the Chinese breakthrough of DeepSeek. So they're there to stay, and I think it's going to be a sort of horses for courses type thing. We're using one or more of those. We often use, for example, OpenAI and Perplexity. Perplexity is super interesting from a search perspective. OpenAI is pretty ubiquitous in other respects. We'll use Claude for coding type disciplines. So that seems to be an emerging truth. The second, and I think we're in the age at the moment, is that agents are emerging. An agent, good definition of an agent is an AI application with a degree of autonomy. They're not just reacting and being directed by your own prompt. And where that goes is agentic teams, where you've got AI, collections of AIs who operate as a team, and perhaps there's a supervising one that delegates to the others and organizes work. So that seems to be a trend that's emerging and pretty interesting. So I think the businesses of tomorrow, and it's not that far away, will be comprised of people and agentic teams, and managers will be leading people and agents, and that's a trend that's developing. The other thing observation I would say is there's a bunch of tools that have sort of somewhat democratized development, right? You don't need to be a computer programmer. There are lots of low code and no code tools, like Bolt or Replit or many others that allow anyone to sort of Lovable is another one to develop stuff. Now, useful prototyping, I wouldn't be using no code and low code tools for sort of enterprise grade applications.
And does the way that, just so I understand those, does the way that they work is you basically speak English or whatever to them and it builds it for you? Is that essentially?
Essentially that. Yeah. In fact, if we took a moment after this recording, we could go on to Synthesia. We could clone you, including your voice and your image. And the next podcast you do could be virtual James.
And would it have enough brain power, which is a lot, obviously, to ask questions and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's basically a voice agent that's connected, or it's a synthetic voice that's connected to a large language model, instructed in a certain way.
With a whole lot less ums and ahs and awkward pauses.
Well, if it's authentic, if it sounds real, it probably needs to have that.
Interesting. So, sorry, I skipped on your train of thought because that was interesting. So you've got those models, and then the sort of the coding.
I think the bottom line is I don't think we're in a sort of Betamax versus VHS. Yeah. We're not in a Google versus Alta Vista or AOL. Yep. I think there's going to be a small number of tools that do certain things in good ways, and you can kind of choose between them. And I'm not sure that the world belongs in the future to OpenAI. That seems to be commoditizing.
If everybody's using it, everybody's got that. It's helping and it's productive, but it's not necessarily giving you a step ahead of anybody else or anything. It's just part of your day-to-day, like Google.
That's true, and it's also less and less costly to use. You're not paying massively for the use of it. So I think the what's going to emerge is a new wave of companies who have chosen partners to work with and figured out how to put orchestras of these tools together in smart constellations that do useful things. And it's sort of back to that AI age is more than ever a human age, right? It gives us all hope, doesn't it? Because the real value is created in the application, and it's generally us, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders who define and pathfind on that.
There's a lot of worry about jobs and job losses in certain sectors, and I think it's kind of like anything. There'll be certain sectors that like the invoice reconciliation that are sort of obvious at a micro level, but is it right to think of it, the way I think about it perhaps is Facebook, you know, the internet was going to destroy lots of jobs. I can't think off the top of my head what jobs it necessarily destroyed. But there's how many hundreds of thousand people working at Facebook and at Meta that didn't exist pre-2007. And so there's job creation as well. And so this sort of bogeyman of we're all going to be sitting there unemployed and the machines are going to do it all. How do you think about it from a country point of view, from a economic point of view, and some of the, and this was an accidental segue into some of your thoughts about education. We'll get on that in a second, because maybe that has to change, and it's kind of topical in New Zealand at the moment because of changes in NCEA. But do you see it in the first instance affecting jobs and unemployment and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so the pattern of history is when a new technology comes along, it has a short-term substitutional effect. So this frictional unemployment, as jobs are replaced that really are better done by an automation or the technology. But in the medium to long term, it creates more jobs than it consumes. And that's been a repeating pattern over time. You know, I'm old enough to remember the outcry in the automotive industry where production lines were automated. You know, these robots were doing the rivets. So you don't find many humans doing rivets or whatever the current day equivalent of rivets are in cars anymore, nor should they, by the way, because a machine can do that faster and more precisely than a person. But more people are employed in the automotive industry today than were at the time of that concern. I wouldn't want to diminish the stress of this transition. There will definitely be jobs that are taken, but there'll be the jobs that should be taken because they're like the invoice reconciliation. If you're a qualified accountant or finance professional, you know, your dream role in life is not to pick up an invoice out of an inbox and figure out which itinerary it corresponds to. Right? That's not like a life affirming thing.
And actually, you want to be able to talk to your client about what else you got to do to grow your business or whatever it is. Yeah.
So what are we great at? We humans are great at making decisions, exercising judgment, leading teams and motivating them, providing a vision, a why that people are keen to follow, and building deep trust-based relationships with customers. And the more that we can do that, the better. And the opportunity is that AI can clean up, you know, the comet tail, the torso and tail of preparation to do that, and expand the time that you're able to spend doing that. Now, I don't want to be sort of Goldilocks and everything sort of rainbows and unicorns here, but I do think I am a technology optimist, and I see tremendous opportunity to make a step change in the scale, growth, productivity that we can reach as businesses and as nations using this technology. And yes, there will be substitutional employment, frictional unemployment, as the economists would say. But generally, it's focused on those things that actually, you know, humans just not as good as the machines at doing it, and probably don't want to be doing it anyway. But what it will also do is create jobs that simply don't exist today. Like in the mid 2000s, there wasn't any such thing as a YouTuber or a TikToker. Well, now it's a thing.
That's all my son talks about.
There you go. there you go. And at a national level, you know, I think it's particularly potent and pertinent for us as a nation in Aotearoa. We're a reasonably small country, 5 million people. We're a pretty isolated country, so services are really important. You don't have to, you know, things that you don't physically have to move are just simpler, you know, because they bridge that distance or eliminate the friction of it. And the opportunity, I believe, I think there's something like 2 million people in New Zealand in the workforce, right? So I'm taking the kids out.
Yep.
I'm taking the retired folks out and the unemployed, etc. What if we could add 1 million of productive workers to that workforce without making the sacrifice of massive immigration or uncontrolled immigration. Well, you can if you think about that productive workforce as a combination of Kiwis doing what Kiwis do so well and their agentic AI equivalents. And there's no reason that productivity can't be exported. Like, what if New Zealand, what if a lot of that agentic workforce productive population served the world, right? There's no export, there's no tariffs attached to that, there's no shipping or carbon costs. It's a service. So I think it's there is an opportunity hiding in plain sight that's probably more relevant to us than it is to more populous nations, because capital is scarce. Human capital is scarce. Yeah.
Do you find being here, it's quite good in the sense of asking this question to someone that you spend time here, but then you spend time away, so you can, I guess, you're not always just caught up in the cut and thrust of Auckland traffic. Not that you're living in Auckland, but that sort of thing. Do you think we're even thinking as Aotearoa thinking about that? Or do you think it's, and if not, is that because New Zealand isn't good at thinking, I guess, outside the box and with curiosity? Or do you think it's this early on in the cycle, no country's really thinking of it in that way?
I think I say this as a proud Kiwi, and a committed. My company is incorporated in Frankton in Queenstown, and we're a global company. So I think we have this.
And UK New Zealander of the Year, for jokes aside, like for all the things that you've done for your country, even when you've lived out of it. So it's
that was I used to do a lot of work with New Zealand businesses who were expanding into Europe, and that's it's a different thing. Turns out the UK is not the same as Australia, for example, as markets go. But I think so. If I sort of look through non-biased, objective eyes, I would say that the business culture, on average, here is conservative. There is a lower proclivity to take a swing for the fences, as they would say in the States, right?
So
take a risk.
I describe it like I'm happy with my lot. I'm okay with where we are at the moment, so I don't really need to push the boundaries. Is that kind of what you mean, or is it I want to, but I just don't know how to?
I think it's probably a combination, and the old sort of Kiwi ingenuity, the number eight wire mentality has a sunny side and a dark side to it. I think the sunny side is, oh my goodness, like we're a great nation of inventors. Look at Sir Peter Beck. Look at Rod Drury and Zero. Look at Halter, right? The cow collar. There are some extraordinary entrepreneurs and brilliant inventors here, and we find our way to these insights by not being bogged down and influenced too heavily by orthodoxy. And in many cases, we don't know the rules, so we don't know we're breaking them. Right. So that's the sunny side. I think it's a great engine room for innovation and invention, and like more of that, please. Right. Keep going. The dark side of that can be a sense of sort of hubris of not invented here. Right. There's a ton of stuff happening in the world that a lot of people are already working on or have solved. And if that sort of sense of ingenuity and number eight wire mentality means that you're sort of blocking off and not looking at stealing with pride, where the problem's been dealt with and solved in different ways overseas, then that can be a great retardant on growth, and it will hold us back from a productivity perspective. Now, I think we're also really good at celebrating and enforcing a great balanced lifestyle, right? So it's really cool to be living by the coast and boating a lot, spending time with the family. There are lots of other nations that have that characteristic. The Nordics come to mind, right? Really,
They seem to be able to do both so well.
they seem to be able to do both, right? So I don't think it's a zero sum game or a sort of binary choice. And certainly the companies that we work with in New Zealand are progressive, entrepreneurial, courageous, thoughtful, and great intentional risk takers. I would like to see the average water level on that mentality higher than it is. And in 25, 30 years of working in Europe and North America and Asia Pacific, it's very clear that there are differences there, and they're differences that are uncomfortable truths. I think it's hard to sort of confront a reality that sort of is inward looking and to accept that perhaps we don't have all of the answers. And so I think we're living in an age where change is constant. It's more rapid and more tectonic than ever, which means a spirit of curiosity and humility is more important than ever. So if we can just combine that sort of sunny side of inventiveness and ingenuity with the humility to follow your curiosity and be comfortable in the uncomfortable space where you sort of feel incompetent.
And it is, I couldn't agree more. And it is uncomfortable. I remember, and without sort of getting too into it, a lot of our listeners already know, but we were investing in one of the first pension funds to invest in Bitcoin in 2020. Oh, the backlash.
Yeah.
But, it's, and it's not just financially been beneficial, which it has for our clients, but just that's 5 years of knowledge that we've gained.
Yeah.
So when we are at record highs in some of those asset classes, we kind of know the drivers and why, and we're not sort of jumping on thinking, oh gosh, what's this asset class? Do you think some of it's government responsibility, or I don't know how you think about that in that sense? The thing why I always think government, I just think of this great big hydroelectric dam in the south of the South Island that really could be used to generate power for data centers, not aluminium smelter. But do you think about it in that way, or are you comfortable with the fact that the setup's right? It's just a matter for us to take it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the government has a role to play, but it's not. It's not. We shouldn't rely on it as a nation. It would be irresponsible in democratic society to sort of outsource that to a group of elected individuals. We're all part of that waka, and David Cameron in the UK, when he was in power, he's a Conservative Prime Minister, had this notion called the big society, and the idea he was trying to capture there was that it's up to all of us, right? All of us need to muck in and do something. The government certainly has a role, and regardless of your politics here, I think there's strides that are being taken. Whether you agree with those strides or not, it's better than not taking strides, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly initiatives. I was fortunate enough to join the Prime Minister's delegation last year, a trade delegation to Japan, and I saw Prime Minister Lux in action. He's a fantastic chief marketing officer for New Zealand. Whether you agree with his politics, like him or don't like him, he's certainly that, and he comes from a position of experience. Is there more that the government could do? I think from the Prime Minister through all of the ministerial officers, they would all say, well, of course we can. And I think, the sort of necessary condition of operating with value in a curious and humble way is that you need to be prepared to make mistakes. If you're not prepared to fail, you'll never come up with anything original. And you'll never create value much beyond the status quo. So I think we need a sense of adventure. We need to celebrate and surface failure as a necessary part of the journey and as a critical part of the learning process and of the innovation process. And we need to cut that slack, I think, for the government and other institutions, sporting teams or whatever,
Yeah.
that we hold on a pedestal. Experimentation.
It's easy to blame all life's failures on government and the All Blacks if they lose.
Well, exactly, yeah. And and it's those failures often. This is a big learning I had from Google. Google absolutely celebrated its failures, glorious failures. Google Glass.
Yeah,
Remember that thing?
Yep.
The little prism. They called it great technology, but the people who wore those things in the Silicon Valley at the time were known as glass holes. Right? Great technology, poor form factor.
Yeah.
Hadn't thought through that part of things. But in every misstep, there is a nugget of gold that informs the thing that becomes successful. And if you had somebody like Sir Peter Beck, talking to you about Rocket Lab, I'm sure he would say that in spades.
And that's almost the ultimate of failure, because failure in his world is quite a big.
Well, it's quite catastrophic.
Yeah, it
could be existential, from a company perspective.
Your kids are not kids anymore; they're sort of the grown men. But and I'm asking this question because my kids aren't; they're 8 and 5. But how do you think we should? Or for a start, I could talk about this all day, Craig, and I won't keep you too much longer. You've got a flight to catch. But how would you think about it from not just a learning at home? Should I give my kid a laptop so he can play on ChatGPT? But what would you be encouraging kids to do to sort of, I guess, get into this world in a way that I guess is healthy but helpful? And I think about it from a not that I was at a conference when I was living in London last year, and someone said something really insightful. They basically asked this question. They said, if you were advising your kids, this person, it was far before AI, even a year ago, AI was nowhere near where it is now. But they said, what would you advise your kids to study at university if they were going to do it again? And he said, the tech, and he was a tech expert, said, the tech part's easy. Psychology and sociology is because understanding the human brain. But, what about younger kids and that sort of thing? Have you thought about that aspect of it?
Deeply. I mean, as a father, by the way, you made me sound like I was.
I know, I know.
As
soon as I said
my kids are like 23 and 20, right? They're not a grandparent yet, but
they're not at home having to be, or maybe they're not dressed for school, which is the doom the doom cycle.
That's right. Very much looking forward to seeing them next week. They're fantastic, Jake and Sam. So I think more than ever before, we're in a world that's changing constantly. The change is more frequent and it's more the magnitude is higher. We live, therefore, in an age where mastery is perishable, right? The moment you get to grips with something, it changes. So I think the most important skill set regardless of you, I was going to say for young people, but it's actually for us as well, right? Yeah. For everyone, I believe, is creativity. So creativity, using that innate ability we as humans have to imagine a future that's different from now, and then go about creating it, seeing around the corners. And to do that, of course, you need to you need to start by not knowing the answer and kind of figuring it out. And you can only figure it out if you start walking towards it in some way. So I think that's the thing that's different now. And of course, there are the basic building blocks, the so-called STEM building blocks. Maths, you need to be numerous. You need to be able to communicate, spell. That's helpful too. So I definitely don't dismiss those. Those building blocks must be there. Beyond that, I'm a big proponent of the sort of Montessori school of thought, where education should be play-led and curiosity-focused, rather than stuck on rails. And as parents, as leaders of companies, I think the best thing that we can do is model that, not consign it to something that the young should do. It's probably more important, or at least as important, for us to do that. You need to, here's the thing. Even if you're talking to a person who owns an AI company, like, don't for a moment think that I'm an expert. We're all amateurs. This is the sort of great beauty of this new AI age. We're all amateurs. It's changing so quickly. Mastery is perishable. Therefore, you're only one click behind the most brilliant or the most advanced. And the best way you can figure it out is just start playing. Like, let your curiosity lead you and start playing. Make some mistakes, fall on your face, and laugh and celebrate when it happens.
I mean, that book that you wrote was a playful curiosity.
Playful curiosity.
I mean, that name is timeless. What a great name for a book, given, I don't know if it was luck or design, but that's absolutely relevant now, isn't it?
Well, I think so. And my kids went. I'm an Auckland Grammar graduate. I grew up in the sort of state school system of New Zealand, and feel very lucky to have done that. And my kids went through the British school system, and they were in what the British would call public schools. We'd call them private schools here, weirdly. So, reassuringly expensive education. But I think what's common between New Zealand and the UK is that it's largely a system that was designed during the Industrial Revolution, where it was important for factories to have a sort of basic level of numeracy and literacy. And I think not much has changed. I think I worship teachers and principals. I think they're some of the most important roles in people in our societies, but they are navigating that they're running that gauntlet within a constrained system, which, in my opinion, is breathtakingly outdated. If you think about, if creativity and sort of starting with not knowing, is a skill set that's going to separate the good from the great, and then you reflect that back on that, and what is our school system? Well, it's still somewhat dominated by assessments and examinations. So effectively, you start with what you know, and you are expected to rote learn it, and then your memory is tested in some way. Rather than, what's the antithesis of an examination? It's probably an experiment where you start by not knowing and you
give it a go
and figure out an answer. So the book that I wrote was, it's more of a leaflet, really, isn't it? It's probably about a 15-minute read.
Or 50 minutes longer than the book that I've written, which is none.
The thesis there is sort of built on this notion that creativity is a really important thing, and it can be unleashed. I'm a great fan of Sir Ken Robinson, rest in peace, Sir Ken. And he famously said, we start as creative beings and we are educated out of it. And by the time we're adults, we've stopped playing. Why? That's quite. I think that's quite dangerous in today's age. So I think the school system needs to be curiosity-centered, playful, and dominated by real-life experience and experiment, as opposed to learning about what others have done in the past. I don't dismiss that. I mean, I think there's a place for it, but I think the orientation and emphasis is all wrong.
And perhaps that's where the Nordics get it right. They don't start school till they're much older.
Yeah.
It's about being there and experiencing, Steiner School came out of Europe.
Right. Yeah. Steiner, Montessori, there are examples as pockets of schools that are sort of thinking differently, but it's a pretty brave parent to say, well, you know what, my beautiful daughter or my beautiful boy, I'm going to roll the dice with them and put them into a sort of new and unproven experiment called X, School X. So I can see why it's difficult to change.
Well, Craig, as I said, I could talk for hours about this. And this goes to sort of my comment from that conference. This is technology, but it's also psychology and sociology and how we think about incorporating this into our daily lives for better, but also, a lot of the geopolitics that are happening in the world are happening because certain pressures on different parts of society, and maybe this is an equal up that we all need, but it's the transition's tough and it's unknown.
Change is hard, but it can also be exciting.
But I appreciate you coming in. Have a good trip back to the Northern Hemisphere. I'm guessing you're back for summer as a swallow. It's New Zealand summer at the end of the year, but
back mid-October.
Yeah, typical. Living the dream, really, isn't it? You just never get winter.
Well, we've been down in Queenstown. I've skied
so
3 days of the last 5, so I can't complain.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time, and look forward to. I mean, if we speak in a year's time again in this forum, it's going to be totally different again. So that's the exciting thing.
No doubt. Thanks for having me.
Great. Cheers. Thanks, everyone, and look forward to speaking next time.
New Zealand Funds Management Limited is the issuer of the NZ Funds Active Income Series, NZ Funds Active Inflation Series and NZ Funds Active Growth Series, together the NZ Funds Active Series, as well as the NZ Funds KiwiSaver Scheme, the NZ Funds Managed Superannuation Service, NZ Funds Wealth Builder and NZ Funds Income Generator. For further information or to request a copy of the product disclosure statement for each of these, please contact NZ Funds or visit nzfunds.co.nz. This recording is provided for information purposes only. The information provided is not intended as a substitute for specific professional advice on investments, financial planning, or any other matter. Past performance is not an indication of future returns.